Hey friend. So today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite things in the ACT model, which is probably one that you're super familiar with if you're on, following me, which is committed action. And a lot of the people who follow me are board certified behavior analysts or in the behavior analysis field. And that's the one that we're most comfortable working in, right? So in school or in the work that you've done or do, creating observable behavior change from observable behaviors is what you've done. Makes sense. So I'm going to just tweak it a little bit. Within the ACT model, this is probably the one that people are most comfortable with. And there's still some expansion that I think can be really beneficial to chat about, at least from the behavior analytic perspective. And then also for anyone who's not in behavior analysis, who's made their way here, which I think that's great. And I would be really excited to, craft some more offers as far as like what I make up here, or content rather, for you. And when we think about committed action, it's all of the mindset work that goes toward how you're going to make your goal happen in your environment. And sometimes that can be easier than other times. But I want to jump into I already posted in my stories some of the ways that we can talk about committed action and how it's connected and how it's not connected. But when we think about ways in which we might be using committed action inappropriately, or ways that we can expand how we perceive committed action, that's what I want to kind of get into. Now, a lot of the times people who are behavior analysts are working with children, people whose values are being put upon them by their parents, and we're using somebody else's framework to being able to create action in another person. And I think we all have to be really careful when we do stuff like that, because having someone who is taking the action, it needs to make sense to them. It needs to make sense to the context that they're living, to their social significance, to their values. Otherwise, why isn't going to measure up. And so being able to take into consideration that is super, super important, just as a sidebar. But also getting into the idea of committed action. So let's think about why some people don't take committed action, right? There are ways in which we set up really nice systems for ourselves and then we don't do it. And that all usually comes down to that this is hard, the acceptance component, that this doesn't feel right. The habit of thought, the habit of feeling is influencing the habit of action, or we're not tapping into the feeling at all and we're just going with what is our habit. And so sometimes, for me at least, a committed action can look like not doing something, which is totally the opposite of sometimes what behavior analysts are going to be talking about, because we like to talk about what we are doing, what's the replacement behavior. But one example for me is letting something be easy. So what I like to do, and the way that I'm trying to work towards my life, is that it's in flow with how I like to work, with the way I like to work, and as far as like time, like how I flow through the day, when I prioritize time. And I have a lot of habits that I'm working around, as far as like 9 to 5, having to be responsible for everything, having to show up with consistency, when those things don't always align with my ideal vision. And so when I look at my values list, responsibility didn't make the top 12. And so when I'm starting to prioritize things over stuff on my values list, with responsibility, right? There's a component of that that's important, but there's also a committed action step to letting it be easy, letting it be simple, allowing myself to say, like, I'm not going to show up in this space when I'm not aligned to do so, because that's not the energy I want to bring to the table, and not like undoing that habit of action, that this is what is responsible, this is what's appropriate. And the committed action step there is actually taking a step back, doing less, letting it be simple, letting it be easy is the other part in like my thought process. Because then there's also that habit of like, well, if I'm not working, then I'm not doing enough. Or if I'm not showing up in this way, then it's not right. People won't know and it won't move me towards my goals. That's not always true. So the committed action step could be breaking apart that thought process and allowing it every single time it shows up for me to sitting in that discomfort a little bit is the committed action step for me at times. That was a really roundabout way for me to get there, so I'm hoping that that made sense. But the idea of doing nothing sometimes being a committed action is a big deal. And it's some that times like it makes sense, but it doesn't always feel true, right? Like I can tell you that and you can be like, oh yeah, I guess so. But it's not the thing that comes to our mind. And allowing like a thought process or a feeling, which is actually the work. That is like the biggest work that I do with my clients is, okay, let's say you've got work and you've got home life and you've got a habit of you're at work, you start thinking about home, you're at home, you start thinking about work, and the two stress you out. The balance of it stresses you out. Instead of saying like, oh, my mind is trying to hijack me a little bit, the committed action step here is to say, thanks brain, but I'm going to stick with what I'm doing. I know I've got a good process set up and I'm going to go with it. And so by committing in like an internal thought component, like, oh, I noticed that showing up, I'm going to go ahead and just allow myself to be at work or to be with my kids. And that is the repetition. When you do that over and over and over again, that action, even if it doesn't look like an action every single time, right? Like it could be an inaction, like you're not going to go check your phone to see if the kids are cool or check your phone to see if the emails are there, right? Like you're going to stick with what you're doing and reframe that thought process. And this touches into the Hexaflex, right? All of the pillars touch and move into each other, but it's subtle, but it's not always what we think of. And I think that a lot of times BCBAs just kind of cut right off the committed action step is like, oh, I get that one, I know that one, and we don't dig into it as much within our own theory and the way that we research it and how we apply it, because we are like, oh, we got it. But that's not always the case, right? And being able to think creatively, get open and curious about how we apply things, how we do things is psychological flexibility. It is the point, and it's just really beautiful. So I hope that some of that made sense and that it might have opened up your eyes to that committed action might not be as simple as we kind of give it credit for. I've actually seen speakers who are like, be like, oh, we're just going to kind of skip committed action because I think you guys understand that one. And we're going to go into the things that are more complicated. And that's fine. You know, those people are making their own things going on. But I think that there's more that can be delved into that. And when we write it off as we know it, that cuts off curiosity at the knees, right? There's no movement when we say like, oh, I understand that. When truly, the more we dig into it and the more we get curious about it, the more questions we come up with and the more complex, like the more questions we come up with, right? We learn that we don't know as much as we know. Like the more we know we don't know. It's a tricky one. So, Chasing Chin-Ups, I see that you have joined me today. Thank you so much. If you have a question, I'd love to answer that around committed action. But that was the majority of what I wanted to talk about here. I did have another thing that I wanted to throw in that I'm playing with around not committed action, but just like my own committed action in how I show up here. And a lot of what I see and a lot of what I do is around healing the culture of ABA, helping people love their science again because they've felt disconnected from their science because they're not necessarily seeing the results that they want to see, either with themselves or the way that they're showing up. Oh, cool. Awesome. I love that you like this perspective. The way that they're showing up in their work or the way that their work is showing up for them doesn't feel aligned with their values. And that comes down to kind of the culture of ABA. And so one thing that I've been toying around with and that I'm starting to feel a little bit good about is making like a group where we can maybe like make a container either in Zoom or in Voxer or in both, and start having some healing for us around the way that we interact with our science, the way that we interact with our culture as scientists, analysts, behaviorists, and using the ACT model to do so. So that way we can start creating the shift that a lot of people, that I'm hearing a lot of people ask for, a shift of getting away from the pigeonhole, a shift, the pigeonhole of autism intervention, the shift towards creating more mindfulness in the field and allowing that to be acceptable, the shift towards opening up and expanding the way that we interact with science in general rather than contracting and niching into how behavior analysis has kind of been shaped and shifted. And there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of fusion in that space, and so that's something that I really feel passionate about, that always ends up being part of my one-to-ones, and I think creating a group would be really cool. So even if you're not live, or if you are live, let me know what you think about that. That's the kind of container I want to create in the future around like healing the behaviorists, healing our culture, and moving towards more psychological flexibility, allowing ourselves some permission to grow and expand, because that's what I think is going to help change the field, change the way that we interact with the medical model, change the way that we interact with our governing body, change the way that we interact with our clients, ourselves, and our staff. So let me know what you think about that. I'm hiding it here in this little one because I'm still playing with it. But yeah, I'll maybe make a post about it in another day when I've got some of my perspective fleshed out. And I hope that you really enjoyed committed action, because I just took my own little committed action step. So, all right. Thank you, everybody. Bye. All right. Hello, everybody. Hello to you who is interested in learning more about